All right, guys, welcome back to the Establish the Pass podcast presented by ClutchPoints. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan. And as you can tell, I sound great for this episode, Dillon. This was not, just yelling, during the Super Bowl or anything like that. This was just, the usual, seemingly 3-month lose your voice thing for people like us who I guess talk a lot for what we do. But we're here to talk about free agents because Dillon's here to talk about free agents. I'm here to not make you hate my voice. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk, Dillon, as we start to look ahead now into free agency. Super Bowl's over. And, this is usually our starting point where we start to look at some of these top free agents out there and try to figure out, what are the best destinations. Our claim to fame on that, I think, is several years ago when we were talking about Tom Brady, and we're like, look, before all the momentum was around the Bucs, we said, just look at the Bucs. Like, there's a very interesting scenario perhaps there for Brady, and of course he wound up with the Bucs. So we try to play matchmaker here. It doesn't always work, but there's at least a pretty. This is a very interesting group here because you've got everybody always likes to start with the quarterbacks. You've got a very interesting quarterback group here. Free agents, of course, headlined by Lamar Jackson. But you've got some good running backs. There's a very interesting group of receivers, some tight ends, and we're really going to focus on those in this episode. Mainly quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. We'll get to all the others in another episode in the future. But for now, we're going to focus on, the offensive skill positions because, again, Dillon, there's so many guys you could point out heading into this free agency. But it does set up to be a very entertaining one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some more entertaining free agencies in the NFL lately, and it feels like it's just going to keep going. I know for a while, NBA kind of had its claim to fame and even at times MLB for having the more exciting free agency periods, but NFL has gotten pretty nuts over the last couple of years, and especially with the quarterback movement. But also a lot of receivers in this class, as we'll get to, even a lot of running backs, kind of deeper than I initially even realized before looking down the list that we have here from Spotrac and PFF and different places. But like you mentioned, it would be too hard to kind of push everyone into one episode, so we decided let's go with the guys that are going to be relevant for fantasy purposes and to some extent with all these skill position players, looking at them first before we look at obviously a really talented class outside of that as well. But even at tight end, I mean, there's just guys all over here. Obviously, we'll see with teams how teams are able to, with the addition to the cap, how they're going to be able to make it work with some of these guys, and also looking at the draft, and maybe there is some depth at some of these positions. But I still think there's a lot of talent to be had here. A lot of guys that we won't maybe have the hottest takes in terms of them going back to the teams that they're currently free agents from. But there's in those cases we'll probably still kind of look at a couple other options if they don't end up there, just in case. But it's a interesting class, really big group here. That's a lot of good names.
All right, let's start with Lamar. We've kind of talked about this before, right? And I think certainly, again, we've talked about just kind of the state of things, how it kind of got to this point, and just where things go from here. Is there any more we should read into it than that? I know it's fun to look at the odds out there, right? Because all the odds are, look at like what are the most likely landing spots. I guess if he leaves the Ravens, however that works. I think the Falcons are the current front runner there. The Jets are right close behind. Raiders are not far away there. But what do we make of the Lamar situation right now?
I mean, it's similar to the last time we talked about it. So we won't spend too long on Lamar. We mentioned Atlanta. That was a team I kept coming back to when I tried racking through all the teams that might want a quarterback. Obviously, there's a lot of teams that would love to have Lamar, but for his own fit, for the system they kind of have, but also some of the playmakers they have, because we've talked a lot about the Ravens not having the kind of receivers that you'd hope to really let Lamar branch out and become the best version of himself as a quarterback. Atlanta has a lot of fun skill guys. They have some good draft picks to continue adding in that spot. So they're the one team that keeps making the most sense if he is to leave the Ravens. But at the end of the day, I think he's just too ingrained in what they are doing. I know that there's some talk if they have a second tag on him, he's not going to be too happy about it. that there's also, he had like a story the other day posting kind of a cryptic message that seemed to hint that he's not exactly pumped about all of this. But nonetheless, I think, those are the two teams. I mean, the Jets, any of these teams that are needy for a quarterback, the Commanders, all these teams would love to have Lamar, in my opinion. But I think the Falcons are the one that, depending, on what you look, like you said, are probably the betting odds favorite if he's going to leave the Ravens. But I still, at the end of the day, I think the Ravens are going to come to their senses and just ultimately pay him. It's just a matter of without an agent, and how the details work out. The guarantee money will be interesting, but I think ultimately it just makes too much sense for both teams to not get a deal done there.
Derek Carr to the Jets, the Bucks, the Panthers, the who? This one's hard to figure out for me. I mean, I think the Jets would make a lot of sense, but I have no idea with this one. This could go a lot of directions, I suppose.
This is almost completely contingent, I feel like, on what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Even some of the recent Carr, or not even comments, but like reports out of his camp in terms of them kind of waiting it out, seem to indicate they even know from their end that, it's Aaron Rodgers. Like if they're going to get him, no hard feelings. I know the Saints were like, the team that was really heavy in with the, talking to him before he was officially released, and still think that could be interesting. But cap-wise, I don't know how that makes sense. Their offensive line also isn't what it used to be. They do have some, would be a major upgrade for them, obviously. They have a talented defense still. I still think they have some, good pieces, but I just don't know financially how that really makes sense. So for me, the Saints kind of become a tougher one compared to the Jets. I know that at one point we'd floated the idea of the Buccaneers. It sounds like the reporting, at least at the moment right now, to Tampa Bay from the beat writers there, is that they're going to run with Trask as their quarterback, and just get a more like an Andy Dalton or someone in that kind of range of quarterback to kind of mentor him and possibly start at the beginning of the season if needed. But ultimately if the Aaron Rodgers Jets thing doesn't work out, I'd say the Jets still are the best fit from. I know it's crazy to say, but their defense was so good this year, as we've talked about. They have some weapons that are coming back. Garrett Wilson had a fantastic season. If Breece Hall comes back healthy, got some other more depth at receiver, some draft picks even improve there further, and a team that is desperate with a GM and coach that, yes, maybe Douglas has gotten more leeway than Saleh, but I think they're a team that realizes they probably need to get into the playoffs sooner than later if they're going to keep their jobs. Just the nature of the business, not something I would necessarily agree with what I think they've done with the foundation they've started to build there. But I think the Jets would be the best fit if the Jets are not going to get Aaron Rodgers. If they do, then I guess the Saints by default, but it's like, I don't know, again, like what that really, the division's not fantastic as we've talked about. Maybe that does make you the best team in the NFC South as it stands. But what does that really mean? Maybe even a more wide open NFC. You can talk yourself into it if you're in the AFC with all the great quarterbacks that are coming up there and have already established themselves. Maybe it's a harder sell, but in general, if you're not going to go to the Jets, if you're Derek Carr, I think an NFC team is probably the route to go, because you need to get out of that conference, man. It's just too deep right now.
All right, the other three quarterbacks we have on our list here, we can tie them all together, I guess, in a different sense. But Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo. We've talked about Jimmy G a lot. I feel like we've talked about Jimmy G to the Bucs for years now. Of course, the Tom Brady thing kind of changed things, but that's always been one that's out there, and that becomes a lot more interesting now. But like the Daniel Jones, Geno one, obviously I think the Seahawks would love to have Geno back based on what he did last season, and there's just I guess a lot of dominoes that could fall depending on what happens with these three guys. But I guess right now your thinking is probably on those two in particular, and then of course the Jimmy G one. Who knows? Because I feel like that's one we've been trying to predict for like 3 years now, and we still have no idea. Maybe just who knows at this point. So
Jimmy G is, again, he's now option 3 for the Jets. This is if they strike out on Aaron Rodgers. If they don't get Derek Carr, then I think again, for Garoppolo, for his own sake, and also for the Jets, that's probably the next best option. I think the Raiders are a team that's been mentioned often with the, going back further to the McDaniels connection and just the Patriot connection with that whole building in Vegas at this point. After that, though, it's like I'm looking down the list, and a lot of these teams I feel like are going for young quarterbacks. We've talked about, we think Carolina, the Colts, the Texans are all going to be in the mix, even the Raiders possibly. And if they're not, another team could trade up and kind of be in that same mix for one of the. But really, with the it depends on where you look. Now, I guess there are some mocks that have Anthony Richardson going number one. I don't. We'll see how that all pans out, but I guess there really are 4 quarterbacks potentially they're going to be taking in the top 10, which is pretty nuts. But for Garoppolo, yeah, I think the Jets or the Raiders, some combination of those two. If again, it's maybe only the Raiders and Jets can get 2 out of these 3 if we include Aaron Rodgers between those 3. So it's like, where does the other one kind of end up after that? I just don't know for Jimmy what other place to make sense, because Seattle for Geno, I think there's too much goodwill between what happened this year and the opportunity he's been given, and as a guy that has fought hard and waited for that moment to be able to show what he can do and to prove it with Seattle, I think it just makes too much sense for them to move forward without each other. Daniel Jones, I know that there's some crazy $45 million numbers going out there in terms of what he's looking for and how far apart that it could be from the Giants. It would be interesting to see a team that took a quarterback like Daniel in this at this point and kind of elevated his play as much as he himself did, but also the team was able to with Brian Dable and then all the what they're able to do with their system there. It would be interesting to see a team like that just completely pivot at this point when they get to that point at the end of the rookie contract. They actually have the honest look at themselves and be like, is this guy really worth that next deal, or should we find the next guy, and can we keep building around with a cheaper contract? That's that thinking that has defined the last a number of these teams. It seems to be either you find the young quarterback, you build up a really loaded roster around him, and hope you really hit on one of those big stars, and then you do re-sign them, or you find that you build up the great roster, then you're able to bring in the guy like what the Rams did with Matthew Stafford, what the Bucs did with Tom Brady. It's just an interesting kind of thing with the Giants because they need some other parts, and it's like you don't want to lose the momentum you had, but I don't know. I think he's going to end up back as a Giant in some capacity. It just in all these cases with these quarterbacks that aren't necessarily the top end guys, but are still solid players, they usually end up getting re-signed. But then sometimes you see what happened with the Rams and Jared Goff, where they cut ties shortly after that. So. They're even though these contracts, some of these deals end up having a number of years, they don't always last that long, obviously. So I think the Giants, there's workarounds there. So I think ultimately they'll figure out something that makes sense for both sides. It might end up being the franchise tag here, though, for Daniel. Maybe they kick the can down the road at least one more year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because again, those are all dominoes that are going to fall and impact the other guy in a lot of these situations. So. All right, the running back group is interesting. Saquon's in there, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery. Those are the 5 we have on our list here. I think the Saquon thing to me feels like it's. I feel like if the Giants are continuing to kind of their ascent up the ladder here, which they did this season, I feel like it makes a lot of sense to return there. But at the same time, you look at some of these other guys and. It is interesting, right? Jacobs, I think you would probably your best bet right now is that he's probably back with the Raiders, but some of these others are kind of fascinating, though. The Pollard thing we've talked about for years, obviously with Zeke there too. Yeah. Miles Sanders playing a role on this Eagles team that is, we just got to the Super Bowl. Dave Montgomery's always been someone you and I have talked about, I feel like, for years. Just has kind of been stuck in the Bears offense on a bad Bears team, and you kind of wonder what's available for him out there. So this is a very intriguing group, and I think just Saquon's resurgence, makes this more interesting should he not return with the Giants.
Yeah, that's going to be the question. If what I said happens with Jones and he gets a franchise tag, then that takes that out of the equation for Saquon. It's hard to, like you said, imagine him playing somewhere else, but he is a guy that until this year has not always been able to stay on the field, even did have some injury issues. You saw, though, how much they suffered as an offense when he was hurt, even though he was playing in some of those games down the stretch, and then he did get healthy more so ahead of the actual playoffs. But down the stretch of the regular season, they were not the same offense without him. I know that running back value and all the things we've talked about and everyone talks about are in play, but it was evident how important he was to what they did, and ultimately that's why I think they'll get something done too. Again, it could not to have all these Ram parallels as a Rams fan here, but it could be like the Todd Gurley situation. Hopefully not, but guys that are at the top of their game look like they're invincible, and then they get the big contract. And not saying that he's going to have the injury kind of issues that Todd did that kind of forced him out of the league. But in terms of just like that contract not looking exactly fantastic by the end of it, I wouldn't be shocked if that happens. But I don't know. The Giants it's one of the more interesting stories to follow. I don't really know for sure that they're going to bring back both these guys. They might only do one. It might be just Saquon. It might be him on the tag, and they might, like we said, kind of go through a different evaluation of quarterback. I think ultimately they will bring them both back. It's just curious to see who's the guy that gets the tag and who gets the deal. If tons of teams would love to have Saquon, I don't even know where to start if he hit the open market. I was looking at least in one place that has some odds up that doesn't cite the actual source, but it has the Dolphins as the second highest team, but they have the Giants as easily the favorite. They have the Bears mixed in there. Imagine him and Justin Fields in a dual threat offense, what that could look like. Houston was listed. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe just because they have enough money to spend. But I think he ultimately stays with the Giants. But I do love the idea of Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins being able to utilize him, or the Bears. Maybe those are two fun ones. The other guys, Tony Pollard, he's going to be a Cowboy. There's some. The Athletic had an article recently with some scouts talking about Zeke's health, and the Cowboys know that and we saw it even down the stretch, and even throughout the whole season, we're saying like give Pollard more plays. And when he got hurt against the Niners, you saw how much it really hurt them as an offense in that game. Tony's just the most important back to them, in my opinion, at this point. I think they're going to find a way to bring him back, probably on a tag again. By the time you listen to this, some of these guys might be getting franchise tags now that the window's open. But the other group, Josh Jacobs obviously had a fantastic year. I think he's earned another deal with the Raiders. I don't think there's any reason to think they're going to just completely pivot out of having him, even with the offensive line that, maybe a better run blocking group than pass blocking, but still did a lot with maybe less than you might have anticipated. So I think Jacobs makes sense to stay. It's hard for me to really probably on the tag too. I know the tag is such an easy one, but it really is with these running backs where you don't want to get tied up into these long-term deals. If you do, you're going to have an out after a few years or whatever it is. Maybe that's the kind of deal they get with Jacobs instead of defaulting to the tag. But he looked really good in that offense too. I think with McDaniels, for some of the questions about everything happening in Vegas this season, I think Jacobs is probably a believer in what they're able to do, and clearly became a huge part of that Raiders offense this year. Miles Sanders, yes, really good player. I don't think he's probably with the Philadelphia, has a lot of things to figure out, including Jalen Hurts and how much money they're going to be paying him over the next few years. So we've seen already with the ability that Gainwell and Boston Scott and other guys they've been able to bring in, they might draft maybe a 4th, 5th round pick, running back, and kind of have that replacement. Sanders is a really good player, but at least from this one situation where they are as an organization with their build, it just feels like the kind of guy that it's like, wow, he's going to leave and hit the market. But I think it could happen. I think a team we just mentioned, Matt Bowen has them on his looking at the top free agents. He has them as the best destination for Sanders. The Dolphins, makes great sense to me with what they with both Jeff Wilson and Mostert hitting the market as well. It could fit really well into what they're doing as an offense. I think maybe using him more as a receiver than even he does in Philly. We see Kenneth Gainwell kind of as the third down back that's catching more passes out of the backfield. But Sanders was a great receiver as a running back at Penn State, and I think in Miami they would find ways to utilize. I think Mike McDaniel is, as we've talked about, the kind of coach that makes the most of the players that he has, and knows how to take every piece of talent they have and find a way in his offense to kind of weave it into the build. So I think that does make a lot of sense. And then Montgomery, as much as I want him to be around if this Bears team starts to elevate. Obviously, they have so much cap space; they could certainly afford him. But I think they're a team that's maybe going to move in a different direction just based on where they are, their kind of timeline. And where it might match up with David. For David's own sake, yes, I'd love him to be around in Chicago for that resurgence with Justin Fields. But for him, at this point in his career, maybe it is finding that, getting a team with a better offensive line, unless the Bears just have they had some good play at certain points this season from guys that did step up. I was actually impressed with a few players there, but I don't know about the, you're not really necessarily looking at the Bears as a top-end group of offensive linemen. So maybe for his sake, he can find a new team. Where that is, though, I'm just trying to, as I'm talking here, I'm trying to think about the best fit. I mean, I mentioned Miami already. They're just like one of the default teams that could make sense. I think Baltimore has too many running backs maybe there to for him to crack into that group, but maybe an intriguing idea. They have brought in running backs and that are maybe older than kind of what Montgomery is, but are down on their luck, that end up being really big parts of their offense. The Bills come to mind as a team that, they never can have enough good running backs. I know they've been kind of a team that mentioned as might be in the Robinson in the draft kind of range. Well, you might go earlier than Buffalo, though. So we'll see what they end up doing. But maybe one of the, I would say a contender for Montgomery that has an established offensive line. Maybe it's the Eagles. Maybe he fills right in for Miles there, depending on the deal he takes. But I think David, unfortunately, I think, as we've talked about, we think he's really talented. I just think he gets a bad, he doesn't get as much credit just because he's played behind some teams for a lot of teams in Chicago that they know they're going to be running the football. They know they're not going to be able to pass as much, and just hasn't been able to flourish as much as I believe he's capable of.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Like I said, this group is another one that's kind of fascinating to see what happens, although some may be predictable. It's free agency, right? You never know. So we always say that. All right, the wide receivers. Here's who we have kind of on the short list here. Jakobi Meyers, OBJ's there, JuJu's there, Sterling Shepard's there, DJ Chark, of course, who's with the Lions this past season. It's certainly not the top level names. Of course, Odell and JuJu maybe in several years ago, but not at this point probably. But these are guys that can be part of that missing piece that a team needs to get to that next level. Whether that's getting to the playoffs, getting to a Super Bowl, those kind of things. They can certainly play a role in that. I'll be honest, Dylan, I don't know what to make of this group because I think there's a lot of possibilities. And again, this isn't really the top level list that maybe we've seen in recent seasons. Because you've got some guys again that can change the game and certainly help a passing offense, but this group doesn't really pack the punch that some of the others have that we've talked about before.
No, I think teams realize some of the value of these guys. We could have another one depending on if we have a cap casualty and Keenan Allen. If he hits the market, that would 100% be a guy I would be mentioning at the top of this group, even as he's gotten not into he's not old by any means, but in the later part of the career timeline of most receivers in the NFL. But with the current group as it stands, no like you said, no like names that are such like big stars, but it could be important for a lot of teams. We mentioned the Ravens as one that I think could make a lot of sense for JuJu and what they could need and what they've needed for a little while. For his own fit, I think it's hard to say that Kansas City wouldn't be great again. I don't know if the money is going to work there. That's the only thing. He might have played it well enough to earn himself a bit more than what the bargain that the Chiefs kind of had him on this past season. At times, good blocker. Just overall, I think a pretty complete receiver. He's not a superstar by any means, but definitely a player that I would like to have for a number of these teams. The Giants kind of in the mix for him can make sense. Another team that has some good receivers, but Shepard's hitting the free agent market. We mentioned him here. Does JuJu fit well into having that kind of big-bodied guy that can be a big part of the running game? In addition to a guy that, as we kind of talked about leading up into last season, a really good zone beater, and that the Giants and some of these younger quarterbacks that are having to face when in these longer passing situations, obvious throwing situations, teams, those scheme them up and get them to confusing places. It's not always easy when the pressure's there. The offensive line feeds a lot into that, but having guys that can find that space in zone defenses, be a friendly target for you, important. So maybe the Giants or the Ravens, two teams that I think could make sense for JuJu if you were to leave. Odell, man, I think about a number of, you look at, he didn't play the whole season, so that makes it kind of a wild card. But you look at the Rams offense again in that Super Bowl, and just even down the stretch of their Super Bowl season, and then when he got hurt and how important he was to be that second guy. He doesn't have to be the number one guy, but he can be the guy that if you put your number two on him and you're not able to double him up on both sides of the ball, he can beat you. So I think the Chiefs are a team that I'd love to see him on. I think that would be frightening for a lot of other teams. I think, what he's able to do and how Andy Reid could stretch the field with him horizontally down the field. I mean, just another weapon. They made it work with a lot of these fun receivers this year, but I think he wouldn't even still be considered maybe in a group that doesn't have like a true number one. He still could be kind of fit well into that offense. It'd be really fun to see what they could do with him. A lot of teams could use him, though. Again, the Giants, a reunion there. I know at times he joked about that on Twitter, and another one that, depending if Jones and those guys are there, maybe it could be fun. I think Dallas it might be my ultimate prediction because I could see them, and they were the one that was rumored a lot this past season. But I think I could see them being the one that just ends up giving him more money than some of the other places, and maybe the combination of being able to compete for a world title with a little bit higher contract. Like maybe Jerry Jones does take a chance there and rolls the dice. We saw again, and I think part of that, Jerry Jones is a guy that is going to react, as we've seen in the past, to certain things in the postseason and what goes down. If he sees one glaring weakness, he'll go after it. And I think at times, as we mentioned, once Tony Pollard went out, obviously Gallup's injuries throughout the year kind of made things tough for overall. But after they traded Amari, I mean, not having that 1-2 punch at the receiver with CD as a clear number one, having that default second guy to do kind of what Odell was able to do for Cooper Kupp, maybe he just looks too clearly at that. He also was referenced, even though, as we talked about, a little silly to say the Eagles went all in when they have so much still built and so much depth. But Jerry Jones kind of compared them and the Rams and what they're able to do and how you sometimes have to be risky, and he considers himself a risk taker. So maybe I'm reading too much through the lines there, but for some reason I kind of took that as maybe Odell or one of these other free agent receivers are going to be an option for him. So outside of that list, I know we had Shepard, Chark, and Jakobi Meyers. Meyers is maybe out of that one. Shepard and Chark, I'm not sure off the top of my head where I'd go. With Shepard, the Giants still make the most sense for me. Chark, a lot of teams would like to have him, but it's hard to pinpoint one. Jakobi is interesting. He's a guy that has been quietly solid. We've always kind of thought he was a pretty good player, but I wouldn't say we'd put him on the list of top free agents off the top of our heads necessarily, but he's kind of on most places you look, and his value and everything, like it seems like he's going to be a hotter ticket here. Finding a fit for him if he doesn't want to stay in New England. Matt Bowen mentioned the Texans in his spot here. If he's going to be a number two kind of receiver for you, I could see that because he's just so good in the intermediate parts of the field. Another friendly kind of target for Mac Jones and any young quarterback in the league, and the way that he's able to run routes and also kind of stretch the field to a certain point, not in maybe the deep parts of the field, but intermediate kind of long crosser kind of plays. So maybe that one makes sense. I think they're a team that, again, maybe that's like the Christian Kirk deal. Maybe it's not on that level, but like last year with the Jaguars, we saw them make a splash signing, and
that's a good comparison.
At the time we were like, this is a lot of money for this guy. And then you looked at over the course of the season, you watched that playoff game against the Chiefs and the comeback against the Chargers, and you're like, man, this actually worked out really well. And sometimes you have to, when you're a team that doesn't have that the established roster, you have to start maybe overpaying a tad because you have that cap flexibility. You have so many young guys on rookie contracts. By the time those rookies need to be paid more, then that deal's gone. So you don't end up the evaluation kind of has to change. So maybe there is something there for Meyers. Outside of that, I mean, It's tough to say off the top of my head. I don't know if you have any other ideas for Jakobi, but that Houston one is interesting to me. I'm thinking of a pairing of him and Bryce Young or Stroud, and it starts to be it starts to be a little more interesting.
Well, if you go the quarterback route, which we expect him to do, it's like you want to pair him with someone reliable, even if it's not like Devontae Adams, right? Like, I mean, you want to still pair him with someone reliable enough to have that as a starting point, even though it's probably going to take multiple seasons to build things where you want it to get to. But I think that's an interesting one. As soon as you said that, I'm like, oh, yeah, that would make sense. So I actually like that one. We'll see if that pans out. But I do like that idea with him because, like you said, he's not someone that's probably getting all the attention necessarily, just for the general fan. But when you just look at what he can do, I think that's an intriguing prospect for a young quarterback, especially for a team like the Texans that essentially have nowhere to go but up, right? So, so I think that's something you could build on and at least have a good starting point. So, all right, tight end group here. It's not unlike fantasy football, where this is not exactly a group that is going to necessarily wow you, but I do think these are three important names because these are three guys that, when you look at kind of what they've done in their offenses, that they can be very valuable. Dalton Schultz, of course, Mike Gesicki's another one, and then Evan Ingram, which you talked about. And again, the signings that the Jags made that made such a huge difference. I mean, he was one of them, given what he did. So, three interesting names here because, like we said, the tight end pool is not a deep one necessarily, but I think these are all three guys that if you're in need of a tight end, you can do much worse than any of these three guys. And, again, we know kind of what the value Schultz has had with the Cowboys, especially when Dak's been on the field. But, you don't underestimate the value, again, of what an Evan Ingram became for the Jags. And, of course, Gesicki has given the Dolphins another kind of option there beyond just, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting group. Yeah, again, it's not like the elite guys, but good players. If you're a team that needs a lot of things, I don't know if these are the best guys to be targeting at this point. In terms of Evan Ingram first, I have a hard time seeing him leaving Jacksonville. I know we're trying to look at best destinations, and it's fun to speculate on new teams, but he was so important, like you said, to what they were able to do. And they took, got the 1-year deal, and I think it was kind of he had a great prove-it year, and I think Jacksonville still has the flexibility in their current place, again, obviously with Trevor Lawrence's rookie contract, the things you can do and still build other places of need at the same time, I think will allow him to stay there. The other two, I think, probably are going to leave. That sounds like, by all intents and purposes, that definitely Gesicki is. I think a lot of stuff has been made about Cowboys wanting to keep Schultz, but it's just not the numbers and how much he's probably ultimately going to be offered not making sense. I think one team for either of these guys that I'd love to see, and maybe a little more makes sense for Schultz with the Kellen Moore connection, is the Chargers. With Justin Herbert and what he can mean as a tight end for them. Having a guy that's able to block and receive at the level of a Dalton Schultz, not just having like, all right, we're going to bring in our big guys to block, or it's clearly we're throwing when Gerald Everett's out there. It could make sense with him. I think the Colts are another possible fit. A team that would like to have a tight end that can be a friendly target for whatever rookie quarterback. I'm assuming they're going to get a rookie quarterback. Jim Irsay not making it hard to assume that with some of his comments, especially Bryce Young being the target. But yeah, I think that one could be interesting too. So maybe the Chargers and Colts are two for him. Gesicki, man, he was just really fun in Miami. I would have liked. Again, I'm mostly going off of the fact that there's been reporting that he's going to leave the Dolphins, that I don't say that he would go back there, because I think he fit really well into what they're able to do. He's a big guy. He's really good in the red zone. Just a great receiver and makes fantastic catches, like really contested catches. Kind of like maybe this isn't the best comparison, but it reminds me at times of Dallas Goedert and what he's able to do in Philadelphia and what he could do in an offense of that level of skill. Matt Bowen has him going to the Panthers. We'll see what rookie quarterback they get. Yeah. That one sure would be good for Carolina, but for Gesicki's own fit, I don't know. Maybe it makes sense because they are a team that's going to be able to offer more money. And those things do ultimately, play a factor in this. It's not just about finding the most fun fit. Like when I say Odell to the Chiefs, like we'll see if that actually could be a reality financially. But for the Panthers there, for again, similar to what I'm kind of getting at with the Colts, so you'd like to have a tight end. It seems to be a kind of a safety net position if you have a really good one. For some of these guys that are able to get open and be schemed up, and I wouldn't have any lack of faith in Frank Reich being a good coach there. But for Gesicki, let's say Dalton Schultz does end up with the Colts instead, I could still see the Chargers looking at Gesicki maybe still more of a receiver than the guy that's someone you envision as like a dominant blocker, but he's still a solid blocker, still a big dude as we talked about. So I keep coming back to the Chargers as one in on one of these guys. We'll see if that ultimately ends up happening. Trying to think of other fits. I mean, again, these are a lot of teams don't have there's plenty of teams that could use another really talented tight end. I just don't know financially if it makes sense. I know Hayden Hurst has been really good for Cincinnati, but if you imagined a 2 tight end set with both these guys, in some cases when they go empty, you have the three receivers plus these 2 tight ends, and that allows you to be more flexible with kind of the blocking. Maybe sometimes you keep 7 in to block, depending on what they do with that offensive line in Cincinnati. Maybe I'm completely off with this idea, but just thinking of offenses that could use another talented guy. And I think Gesicki just maybe similar to some other not necessarily like Miles Sanders, but just like in terms of guys that are underappreciated in my mind. I think he's really good. I think he's just a great receiving tight end that has a chance to be a lot more depending on where he ends up, and already was at times putting up some big moments for Miami. I just think he could be utilized even further in a team that doesn't have the multitude of weapons that the Dolphins did.
Yeah, that should be interesting. Like you said, for him, I don't know if I'd love that fit, but to go from the Dolphins offense to the Panthers offense may be a little frustrating for him at the moment. But it all depends, we said, who the quarterback is, and we don't know that yet. So, we'll see. But this is an interesting group. Like we said, we could do this for hours based on the other kind of players that are out there. But we'll dive more into them in future episodes. And as we know, once free agency gets going, it's fast and furious, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see how it pans out. But of course, Dylan got it all covered over ClutchPoints for now. I'm sure looking at a lot of potential destinations for all these guys and everything else to keep everyone updated on the NFL offseason. So let everybody know where they can find all that.
Yeah, at ClutchPoints.com in the NFL section, we've been looking at some possible trades that teams are going to be making this offseason. But yeah, one of our big series that's coming out is exactly on this, the best destinations for all the top free agents. So we'll be going through those. We'll also have our list of I believe it's going to be our 25 top just overall free agents. So won't go into all the guys we talked about here. It'll be more of a kind of a compilation of what we did here in our next episode with free agents that aren't at the skill positions on the offensive side. So we got that going up at ClutchPoints.com. You can go to the ClutchPoints app, the NFL section, read the same content's all going to be showing up there. We got our social stream kind of updated with all the news and different things that we're covering on the website in the NFL section. So yeah, anything free agency, anything draft. We got our mock draft out. We'll be doing another mock draft after the combine. Tons of stuff, all for the entire offseason, as we've said on this podcast a number of times. This ends up for us being almost busier than it feels like than at times during the season. So a lot of things to be worked out, a lot of rumors to keep up with. And yeah, a lot of free agents that, as we talked about here, that are going to be new homes for these guys in 2023.
Yep, should be fun. So check it all out at ClutchPoints as always. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. And thanks as always for listening to the podcast. And we'll talk to you next time here on the Establish the Pass podcast.